All right, folks, I have good news for once in a while. The Florida Senate hasn't been signed by the governor yet, but pretty certain this is going to be signed by the governor. The Florida Senate has passed a repeal of the charter. I guess it's called a charter for the Reedy Creek Improvement District. For those of you who don't know, the Reedy Creek Improvement District is a euphemism for Walt Disney World, because when it was created, there was no Walt Disney World. Walt Disney built his theme park in, I believe it's actually Osceola County, not Orange County, although who knows. It's right along there. It's right along the border. But I believe it's actually Osceola. After receiving a concession from the state of Florida that basically said Disney would not be subject to Florida law or to the local county law. That's an oversimplification, but pretty much you go to the Reedy Creek Improvement District. They are Walt Disney police, Walt Disney firefighters, Walt Disney administration from head to toe. I believe they do whatever they want with their land. They don't have to go through permits like normal, like normal Floridians do. Which, for those of you who haven't done that, it is an annoying infringement on your rights as a property owner. Every time you, rip out a piece of drywall or something like that, you have to go to the city or the county and say, please, sir, may I repair my home? May I, continue to improve my property as I see fit? Well, if you're Walt Disney, you don't have to, because you're within the Reedy Creek Improvement District. And what essentially the state did 50 years ago was preemptively approve any improvements that the Walt Disney Corporation would like to make to their property. Up to and including, as the, I believe it was the Florida Speaker of the House pointed out, up to and including a nuclear power plant. Now, we have some true cons, people like Charles C.W. Cook, from the National Review, coming out and, they're a small minority, but they do exist. The true cons who come out and say what DeSantis and the Florida Republicans are doing is a disgusting attack on free enterprise, and they're retaliating against a private business for having the wrong political views. That's what we're being told. And this is so bad. The Republicans are trying to be unfair and pass unfair legislation to companies that disagree with their politics. Now, it's incredibly disingenuous for people to make this case, considering that Walt Disney had been given... It's not that Walt Disney is being treated more poorly than any other company in Florida. Their privileges, which were unfairly granted to them, their privileges which made the Walt Disney Corporation, on a relative basis, far more powerful in the state of Florida than any other company, those privileges are being repealed. Walt Disney now will be treated by the Florida government and by the government of their county no differently than any other corporation. They no longer have carte blanche to do whatever they want. This is how it should be to begin with. Republicans, at the state level, have this fetish with granting special rights and exemptions to very large corporations, to allow those large corporations to trample on small businesses. They make small businesses deal with all the bureaucracy of the state and the local government, and corporations are given a free pass if they, if they grease the skids, if they pad the pockets of these politicians. And, it's one thing for them to do this when nobody's paying attention, but for corporate Republicans now to come out and act like they are, morally, morally offended by Florida taking away these privileges, these corrupt privileges which were granted to the Walt Disney Corporation, is itself morally offensive. What we're seeing today in the Florida legislature is a small movement towards restoring equality before the law. Equality before the law is not something that we have here in the United States. We are far from having equality before the law. It is obvious to anyone with eyes and ears that different people are treated differently before the law. What is written down as the law means different things depending on who's reading the law and who the law is being applied against. Obviously, companies like Walt Disney, or let's say Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, or Amazon, or Nike, or a whole host of others, they are granted special privileges by governments, local, state, federal, all across America. When they are in legal trouble, they are treated with kid gloves by the courts. When one of these companies wants to open a new facility in some state, they don't look at all the 50 states and all the different cities and things and say, hey, where would be best for us to do business? What they do is they put out essentially an open invitation to these cities to say, hey, you write us a proposal and tell us what you're going to give us, how you're going to bribe us to move to your city. And this is a totally out in the open practice that companies like Walt Disney, Amazon, Nike, McDonald's probably, well, I don't know, McDonald's is everywhere, but maybe if they're to open some kind of large facility, like a factory distribution center, corporate office, something like that. These companies put out these open invitations, and they beg, or they shouldn't say they beg, they beckon local and state politicians to make them offers. They say, hey, what special free things can you give me? Whether that's 10 years of not paying taxes. That's a common thing. They'll say, hey, you move here, you don't have to pay taxes for a few years or something like that. Or other little things. Free land, special permitting, special exemptions and special privileges that other businesses and other individuals already living in those states and those counties do not get and will never get. Disney World, as you see it today, could have never been built by a private individual, abiding by the laws as they're written. Disney World was built because the Walt Disney Corporation went to Florida and essentially bought them off and said, you know what, hey, we want to be above the law. We want you to write a law saying that the Walt Disney Corporation doesn't have to follow the laws. That's not free enterprise. That's the opposite of free enterprise. And so if any of these clowns at outlets like the National Review or any other neocon journal, and I hesitate to use the term neocon because neocon doesn't really have an economic connotation to it. So I guess let's just call them the corporate shills, of the right, the corporate shills of the Republican Party. These people have never believed in free enterprise. In fact, the founder of the National Review, William F. Buckley Jr., said, I believe in the 1960s, in the pages of the National Review, he wrote something to the extent of, in order to defeat, the totalitarian regime in the Soviet Union and save the world from global communism, we must create a totalitarian regime within our own shores, something to that extent. Essentially saying that, having this, this big, massive government that these people claim to hate is okay, as a means of achieving our own goals. And, sure, at some point later down the road, when the Soviet Union's gone, we'll go back to being a normal country. Of course, that never happens. The American government collectively, at the local, state, and federal level, is more oppressive and corrupt than it ever has been. And the people who benefit from corruption have a much greater incentive to propose and to advance their corrupt interests than any other individual, or than other individuals have in opposing corruption, if that makes sense. The beneficiaries of corruption have much more to gain from corruption than ordinary people have to lose from corruption. That's why it's extremely difficult to organize people against this sort of thing. The Walt Disney Corporation gained far more from the Reedy Creek Improvement District's existence than the average Florida business or Florida citizen lost from the existence of the Reedy Creek Improvement District. But collectively, when you add up the negative effects on everyone else and you put them all together, it of course far outweighs the benefit gain granted to the corrupt interests. And it's not like it would be justified if that weren't the case. The corruption of government by certain moneyed interests, which, in and of itself is, that's a given. When you have a government, there's going to be corruption. It is always unfair and wrong. It's a main reason, or that's not the main reason. It's a main reason, it's a major reason why government is inherently a bad thing. Even if you think it exists, I will still argue to you. I'm not going to try and argue to you, oh, we should get rid of everything or whatever. I don't need to get you on that side. You don't need that far. But it's an inherently evil institution that promotes immorality. Unfairness and government go hand in hand, because government by nature forces people to do things that they do not want to do. That is the definition of government. The only thing that separates government from ordinary people just cooperating and working together to achieve goals is that the government uses force. They use the barrel of a gun in order to organize that cooperation amongst people. That's the most fundamental difference between charity and welfare. Despite the fact that welfare is far more inefficient and corrupt. Leaving that aside, even if you have, but charities can be very inefficient and corrupt as well. But let's say you have a charity and a government welfare program that are equally fair or equally corrupt, however you want to look at it. Fundamentally, the government welfare program is organized and funded by men with guns, knocking on people's doors and demanding money, whereas the private charity is organized by people going around and persuading individuals. Now, they might do it through dishonest means. They might lie to people. They might mislead them. But at the end of the day, they are still just using persuasion. They're not putting a gun to anyone's head in order to collect funds. And that's why government corruption by private corporations is fundamentally evil. Because private corporations like the Walt Disney Corporation leverage the aggressive force of government, the iron fist, in order to give themselves an edge in competition against uncorrupt businesses that play by the rules. In other words, if the Reedy Creek Improvement District was so great, why don't we grant those same rights to property owners across the state? Say to property owners, hey, you know what? Don't worry about zoning or traffic or impact fees or permits or any of these things. Do whatever you want. You don't have to let the county sheriff onto your property. You can organize your own police force if you want. Have your own neighborhood watch. You can keep our cops out if you want. Why don't you go ahead and do that? If the Reedy Creek Improvement District is so great, I wouldn't be opposed to that. If the rights granted to Disney were granted to property owners all across Florida, that would be a fair trade-off to me, because I don't like what Disney does with their property. I think that it has ruined the natural beauty of Central Florida. I've talked about this before. I just am so saddened always whenever I see new construction in that part of the state, because it is, the land there is so pretty. But if I had just as much right to do on my land what I want, that would be a fair trade-off, because I'd say, you know what, I'm going to buy, I'm going to work and try and buy, as much land as I need to do what I want with my life, and then I can feel content. And then what other people do with their land, is not so much my business. But when I can't do what I want with my land, but other people can, i.e. Walt Disney, that's infuriating. And hell, the Black Lives Matter people should support this, because I bet they would like to have their own private police forces. That's what they talked about. I mean, that's really what the abolish the police movement was about. They were every time they were asked, well, what are you going to replace the police force with? They said, I don't know, but we don't want their police. We want to have our own people do that. That's no different than what the Walt Disney Corporation asked from the state of Florida, and what now we're being told is it's so outrageous, that they're losing. White supremacist Walt Disney gets to have his own private police force, but The black community does not. Does that sound very fair to our BLM friends? I don't know. I guess BLM doesn't really exist anymore, but I mean, at the end of the day, this is a small victory, but it is a victory nonetheless. It is necessary retaliation against a company like this. As the state representative, I believe it was, or maybe it was a state senator who introduced this bill, as he said, Disney is a guest in Florida, and they need to be reminded of that. Their power is not absolute. They cannot dictate what we do, and they should not have any special privileges over what any other person in this state has. Equality before the law is a noble goal. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.